Lecture number 7, Deviance and Mental Health. To be honest, the title of this chapter should bother you a little bit. If you have not already thought about it, it goes something like this. Mental health is an issue of healthcare. It is a health condition. It is not deviant, and to compare deviance to mental health is like telling someone with a broken arm that they are deviant in some way. Unfortunately, in the history of society, many people have treated deviance and mental health in a similar manner. Specifically, people who act outside of the norms of society were set aside from everyone else, just like criminals. The most important issue is that sociology does not approach deviance as just criminal deviance or mental health. It includes any unacceptable behavior, any behavior that's not accepted by a group or society. Defining normal. If I were a really good professor, I would have you start this section by writing down the things that you think are right or wrong about the world, focusing on social issues, and then have you review this table to see where you stand relative to other people. The important thing is not whether you are right or wrong, but one, that society changes its views on what's right or wrong over time, and two, we are influenced by those shifts. Consider this. Do you think it is okay for men and women to have sex before marriage? How about birth control? If you grew up in American society in the 1800s, do you think you would feel the same? Probably not. Your values and beliefs tend to follow along the larger norms of society. At a minimum, it is a reference point. Even people who don't believe that birth control is acceptable today know not to bring it up in conversation because they know that they will most certainly face an argument or even ridicule. Finally, what behaviors would you say would exist on the unacceptable side that are not listed here? Think about things like racism or sexism. Where do you think society stands on this topic? How do you know? This is the power of the generalized other discussed earlier in the class. We learn about the values and beliefs of society through networks of interaction among people. In most cases, with no words being exchanged at all. Creating deviance and compliance. Deviance is a thought or behavior that is undesirably different from a group or society. Deviance exists at the societal, country, or even global level, as well as among subcultures. Certainly Muslims and Mormons have different sets of values than the larger American culture. Once norms of acceptability are established, groups and societies create agents of social control to help enforce those norms. We typically think of police, but anyone with authority in your life can serve that purpose, including teachers, politicians, clergy, parents, even media figures. Research in social psychology shows that with no doubt that people in authority positions have a much stronger influence on our beliefs than people who share similar statuses in our lives. Labeling theory. There are many theories of crime and deviance, but the most dominant one in symbolic interaction is labeling theory. Labeling theory explains deviance by arguing that people commit deviance for any number of reasons, but at some point it becomes part of their identity. Once people accept their attitudes or behaviors as part of their identity, they seek out other people like themselves, or deviant subcultures, to help them sustain this identity. There are 3 parts of this process. Primary deviance, the initial acts of deviance that can occur for any number of reasons. Secondary deviance is deviance that becomes part of our identity. And the last part is deviant subcultures, when people join with other people who are committing these deviant acts or have those thoughts, and they help to reinforce those identities. This logic can include any type of deviance, really. First, people do some sort of deviance. It might be theft, self-mutilation, drugs, and either continue the behavior or not. In most cases, especially among teens, they stop the behavior relatively quickly. In other cases, they continue to do so until they are labeled as such, as persons who, are just deviant. They're just a thief or a drug user or anything else. At a crisis point, a person has to decide whether this label is true. Crisis only means that the label is applied so often the person has to come to decide whether it's really part of their identity or not. If so, the motivation to continue the behavior is self-sustaining. It's just something that someone does, just like any other aspect of our identity. Deviant subcultures serve two purposes. First, they provided an emotional environment for people to feel better about their deviant identities. They may give positive feedback when they engage in a behavior, or simply give them a place to relax. These deviant subcultures also provide techniques to be better at the behavior. A group of thieves are a great resource for learning how to steal things. As a result, someone who is engaging in deviant behavior can get better at it, and they can feel better about what they're doing. Mental health and illness. There are whole books written on the topic of the sociology of mental health. An early writer on the topic was Thomas Szasz. He is a psychiatrist who argues that mental health is much more of a moral issue than a health condition. That is, society decides what is appropriate with regards to our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and then we sanction people to follow that order. If they do not act according to the rules of normal, they will be set aside in one way or another, whether it be a jail or an asylum. In either case, they are set aside from quote-unquote normal society. We justify this behavior in many ways, for instance, the patient's well-being. But Szasz would say that it is only to make ourselves feel more comfortable. Another major thinker in this area is Erving Goffman, the theorist that brought us dramaturgy or impression management. He spent a lot of time observing people in asylums. His work helps to elaborate the ways that norms and roles develop in these places with patients more or less accepting their statuses of being sick. The point is that society may label someone as a deviant, in this case mental health, but that does not mean people simply accept those labels. Some people do, but many rebel and find ways around them. Conclusions. Why examine the idea of deviance in the first place? For many of you, it is interesting in the same way that crime is a common part of television programming. To some degree, it is downright fascinating. But the real reason to study deviance is that it is a normal part of society. Can you have normal without deviance? From a symbolic interactionist perspective, deviance is just one of many things that people simply do. In this sense, it will never go away. It is more about how much and what types of deviance there is in society and who controls the labeling process. At one point in U.S. history, for instance, smoking marijuana was simply wrong. Now, in many circles, it is not only acceptable, but even a good thing to do. All of this happened in only about a decade. That's super fast by societal standards. I hope that you can see that this not only gives you the power to question what people consider deviance, but it is okay to conform as well. In both cases, it comes from dynamics that occur in society.